Let's talk about making stories, comics, and graphic novels. And let's look at some tips and tricks I have for you on making your stories really good. All right, let me share my screen and we'll talk about a few things. All right, so how to make comics, graphic novels the Patrick Scullin way. First question that you got to answer is where do ideas come from? And it's something different for everyone. But what I found in my own routine is there is a way to kind of prompt storytelling to make it more reliable, I guess. So for me, when I started Super Siblings, this is when I really developed my way of working and writing. And so the best advice I have to you is just live your best life. Live life, have experiences, go out and about and do things, and then see what happens, right? When those things happen to you, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, write them down. Keep a sketchbook, take notes. As you have these experiences, run into situations, and you take notes and take little sketches and keep track of these things. That's when you're going to stumble into something good that you can use for your story or your book. Um, as I was developing Super Siblings, it became a regular comic strip. And so the idea was that whenever something funny happened to me, or, my kid said something funny, or some situation happened, by keeping track of those things and writing them down later, when I got back to my drawing desk, I could turn those into little scenarios and little jokes to turn into a situation that would work as a comic strip. And I really enjoyed that process for years. It was fun to come up with funny situations and funny jokes. And, as you look at these, you may not say they're super funny, but for me, they made me chuckle, right? A lot of dad jokes. Well, I realized that I wanted to push Super Siblings in another direction. I wanted to get more into publishing. And so I started crafting longer stories as comic stories and graphic novels. And so these were situations where I still wanted to keep the humor, but then I wanted to create an adventure so that something happened, that the characters engaged each other and had some interesting or funny resolution at the end. And that's how the Super Siblings Adventures were born. And that's where I work with Super Siblings right now. So I try to make a book or a story form version of it more regularly. So to get into that process, how to write a story, not just a good joke, is a little more involved. And so let's look at that. First and foremost, what is a good story to you? For me personally, if I'm looking at stories, I'm looking at movies and thinking about what movies inspire me. And my favorite movie of all time, you might think it's Star Wars, but actually, it's A Wonderful Life is my favorite movie. I just love the sentimentality of it. I love the good-natured characters, the family dynamic, all of it. To me, is a really fun slice of life, interesting story showing the development of these characters. And so, as a hallmark, it's a great example of storytelling from beginning to end. Another fun series that I've always been into is Stranger Things. To me, that's another type of good story. Of course, it's not as sentimental as It's a Wonderful Life. It's a little more, fantastic and sci-fi and spooky scary, but it had interesting character development and there were surprises and there was mystery and something interesting to discover, which kept the audience interested and still keeps the audience interested and caring about what happens to the characters. So, character is another important thing. Ahsoka, on the other hand, very underwhelmed by Ahsoka. I love the character Ahsoka. I love the character Thrawn. I even like the other characters from Sabine and so on from Rebels. But the story itself had so little adventure and so little stakes in it. It was boring. Nothing really significant happened. All we really saw was Thrawn talking about doing something, and then he kind of did it. And then, without doing a lot, Ahsoka showed up in time to disrupt it. It was like, what? So, very underwhelmed. That story was not good from a storytelling point of view. Characters were interesting, but they were more like the veneer of characters, right? They weren't really the heart of those characters so much as the story was bland. And I'll try to explain a little bit why. So, when you're trying to craft your story, here's a few things to keep in mind. Number one, you want to write the beginning from the end. You need to know where your character and your story is going to wind up. Tip number two, the hero is only as strong as the villain or the situation they overcome. Now, in Ahsoka, for example, the villain is trumped up as this amazing villain. Thrawn is this awesome, intelligent guy who's going to outsmart everyone. Yet he was foiled pretty easily in the end, and there weren't really dramatic stakes for life or death scenario. I mean, they tried to make it that way, but it really wasn't. So it was weak. So typical storytelling breaks down into a three-act scenario. And for me, this is a simple way of looking at how to craft a written or a comic book story because we want to keep it fairly simple. We're not writing a huge, dramatic, developed novel. We're making a comic, right? So breaking it into three parts makes sense. Act one, you got to have something to grab people's attention. You got to figure out what happens to get the ball started, the story rolling, right? Establish that situation, create that conflict. And for comics especially, it needs to be visual. There needs to be something dramatic happening visually. So in this case here, we've got Gwen and Peter, right? Something's happening. Act two is when that story kind of gets in gear and things start to happen. The situation gets worse, or drama is amped up because the characters are put in jeopardy. Something major happens, and in this case, Green Goblin shows up, causing trouble. Something major is about to go down, and again, we want to really focus on the visuals. Act two, where things really heat up. Act three, well, that's when things get resolved. Whatever that conflict was, whatever was happening, it comes to a head and then somehow it's resolved. Either the good guy wins, the bad guy wins, or there's a tragedy like with Gwen. Something significant happens that affects the characters. So they are not the same as they were when they started. The story can end or conclude. And I wrote resolve, it resolves, but it really means it concludes. So the characters are different. If the characters are the same as they were at the beginning of the story, then something's wrong, right? It's a bland story. That's why I keep going back to Ahsoka. Nothing significant happened, and they were the same at the end. Maybe they were in different places, but emotionally, they really weren't that much different. The only bright spot in Ahsoka was the episodes with Anakin, and those had some emotional depth. Too bad it just didn't last longer. All right. So you have that armature, that three-act play. Well, inside that story, to really make it shine, are the characters. You need to have good characters. And in comics especially, you want to have a good hero and a good villain. So, like I said earlier, your hero is only as strong as the villain or whatever significant thing they have to overcome. If they don't have a significant challenge to overcome, they are a weak hero. And so you always have to amp that up. Also, each character has to have a clearly defined motivation. What do they want? What do they love? What are they afraid of losing? Why do they get involved? Or why are they afraid to get involved? What are they trying to resist? What are they trying to help? What are they trying to do? And that applies to all characters. So as you're developing your story, you need to ask each one of your characters these questions. Who are they? What do they love? What are they about? What are they afraid of? What are they not afraid of? Etc. Those types of questions must be answered for each one of your characters for you to really make sense of who they are and what they're doing in your story. Once you have that basic plot, three-act play figured out, and then your characters and their basic motivation, that's when you can start crafting the story. Now, I've experimented with a few different types of methods for doing that. So for me, lately, I write a script. And so it's strange that I write it, I illustrate it, I do the whole thing. It's kind of strange that I would write a script, but actually it helps me because it puts the ideas on paper and allows me to help to read and visualize what's happening. So that's my basic method now is I just lay out the pages and then I write down kind of an outline form what's happening on each page. And it also helps me plot out the dialogue and think about what each character is saying to the other, what's happening, and I describe it. Another way of looking at that few of my friends do this, I've done this before, is go plot-based scripting and kind of like storyboards. So maybe you don't think about every literal piece of the story, but you think about the main event and the significant scenes or situations that happen. And maybe you sketch those out and you map out in thumbnail form what's happening at each point in the story. These are those story beats. So I want this to happen. I want to see this happen. This is great for comics, especially because what you're doing is you're visualizing the beauty shots. What's going to really get people interested in what's happening. And you use this visual outline to help you plot out the outline of the story so you know how it's progressing. So that's another way to go, which is also another way of saying kind of the Marvel method. Now, the Marvel method was a collaboration between Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, or Stan Lee and some of his other artists, where they would sit down and they would basically figure out the three-act play and discuss what was going to happen. And then the artist would go away and illustrate it, kind of plot it out in visual form, and they would finish the art. Then Stan Lee might come back and then write in the dialogue, write in the narration to go along with the visuals. And that was called the Marvel way for years. And it was kind of a good way for the two halves of the creative team to work together, to collaborate. Other artists today, maybe kind of the DC method, is the script form, where a script is written by the writer and then it's sent to an artist, and then that artist, their job is to visualize that script and plot it out on paper. Me personally, since I'm working independently, I like both methods. And lately, it's pretty much a hybrid where I'll sketch out the main plot scenarios that I want to see, and then I'll write down the script so I don't forget what I want to say, what I want to write. And then when it comes together in the end, I'll do the finished art and then drop in the dialogue and the narration as needed. So that's a good way to look at how to get your story written and get it plotted. In the next video, we'll talk about how to do the art. All right. Thanks a lot.